This section is on infinite limits. It's 1.5 in calculus. Really quick section. What we're going to talk about here is how do we know when a function is going to give you an infinite limit? How do we know when it's going to be infinity, basically? And there's a couple ways to look at this. So the first thing we can look at is a basic limit. If you are approaching infinity from both sides, then it's going to be infinity. If you're approaching negative infinity from both sides, then it's going to be negative infinity. And if we're trying to get a full limit of something that's going to both positive and negative infinity, those limits typically don't exist. But for the most part, we're really going to be doing mostly only one-sided limits for these, okay? So instead of us doing both side limits, you're mainly going to see things like this. Determine the limit of each of the following functions as x approaches 1 from the left and the right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply write these out. I want the limit of f of x as x approaches 1, and I want from the right, that's where we put the plus sign, and I also want the limit of f of x as x approaches 1 from the left, which is the negative. And all we have to do is look and see what's happening. As we approach 1 from the right, you can see that our function is going up like this, so it's going up to infinity. And then the same thing is true over here. As we approach from the left, it's still going up to infinity. So each of these separately are infinity. Now, if there was a question asked, what is the limit of f of x as x just approaches 1, then we know that we can write that as infinity as well, because they're both approaching the same thing. Now, keep in mind that does not exist is technically also true here, because that's what we originally learned. That's why you won't see this very much, because sometimes there is some confusion about whether it does not exist or whether it's infinity. Infinity and does not exist are sometimes the same thing when it comes to two-sided limits like this. But up here, we need to be clear that one side is for sure going to infinity, because that's the only place for it to go. Okay, over here, same thing. We're going to do limit as x approaches 1 from the right of f of x, and then we're going to do the limit as x approaches 1 from the left of f of x. And again, you can see from the right, if we're going from the right, it's now going down, so we just write negative infinity. And on the other one, as we approach from the left, it's going to positive infinity. This one, for sure, would have to be does not exist, because you're approaching two different things. So if we're just approaching one, not from the left or the right, from both sides, we would have to say does not exist. Okay, the other thing that we can talk about is that if a function is approaching infinity or negative infinity as x approaches c, then we know that x equals c will be a asymptote. As you can see from these dotted lines, every single time, if we're going to positive or negative infinity, we know that that has to be an asymptote. Okay, so that's all we're going to talk about with infinite limits. So hopefully that makes sense. And again, if an Edmodo quiz has been assigned, then go ahead and take that, and I'll see you in class.